Hello. It is March 30th, 2026. It is time for another geopolitics thought of the day. Today I am thinking about fifth generation warfare. After the war in Georgia, the Russian Federation began to modernize and transform its military into what it believed would be the fighting force of the future. This was based around something called, I believe it was a brigade combat team or a light brigade or something. And the idea was that they would use these relatively cheap, highly mobile, light formations to get an expeditionary capability, the ability to rapidly send units out and achieve political goals. And they would carry out hard military operations like shooting people or occupying particular zones in concordance with a broader plan of shaping the information space using cybernetic capacity and less than lethal or non-lethal or non-kinetic operations. That's hacking power stations, taking over TV stations, different kind of station, that kind of thing. The goal of fifth generation warfare was to be able to modulate your military operations so that they fell beneath your opponent's two kinds of thresholds that your opponents needed in order to make decisions. These are the attribution threshold and the response threshold. So they're what they sound like. The attribution threshold is the point at which your enemy is certain that you have carried out an operation against them, and the response threshold is that operation is so deadly, is so dangerous that it provokes a kind of a hard response, a response that takes political capital, stability, or economic power away from you. The goal of this is for Russia to be able to operate while Western countries don't react. This was pretty successful in Syria. It was pretty successful in Ukraine in 2014. And it kind of leveraged this idea about democracies, that democracies have a real hard time making rapid decisions and committing to courses of action. So if you have a big public debate about whether or not we should go and fight Russia, well, a lot of people, for obvious reasons, are going to say, hey, we shouldn't fight Russia for all these reasons. And the result is that your government is probably not going to take very drastic or dramatic action against Russia. Great if you're Russia, right? This is kind of like the I'm not touching you game that kids sometimes play, right? Where you're in the back seat and you get closer and closer and closer to somebody without actually touching them, and you kind of complain to try to bug them without actually being able to provoke a response. And if you've done this a bunch, you know that typically this ends in a fight. Maybe that's just me. But typically that ends in a fight. Why the Russians thought they would continue to get away with it, I'm not entirely sure. But the impact seems to have been that the response threshold among the attribution and response thresholds over time lowers. So the longer you do fifth generation warfare, the more willing the people you're doing it against are to both, call out a particular operation as a Russian operation and then react to that. Over the years, we've seen more and more aggressive action from the United States and from Europe against Russia. And this is kind of a dynamic problem for this style of warfare because it's an asymmetrical style of warfare. It's intended to allow a weaker party to compete with a more powerful party. But if that more powerful party just decides that they're not going to play the game for whatever reason, reaches a level of intelligence certainty or political capital or whatever, that they decide that they're actually going to confront you, you are very likely to get caught out somewhere.
I've noticed also that this is a doctrinal advantage. So the Russians held a maybe a doctrinal advantage over the West in that they were willing to leverage certain technologies that the West wasn't at the time, or didn't have like the full assets in place to leverage. But doctrinal advantages aren't actually really like long term good things because the person you're fighting against can learn. The classic example of this is carrier air operations. In 1941, pretty much only the Empire of Japan can do real full scale carrier air operations. They've practiced this, they've strategized this, and they think this gives them kind of an impossible to overcome advantage against their enemies. But the British and the Americans learn. They learn very rapidly, and they're able to put their more robust industries into play. And the Japanese find themselves rapidly faced with a force that has a better doctrine than them and is more able to use it. I think we're starting to see something similar to this happen with Russia. Uh, the United States has gone on a really aggressive military campaign over the past year or so. God, no. Over the past like 3 months, um, of just kind of knocking down anybody who disagrees with them. And these have been covered by really successful intelligence shaping operations. Granted, people have not entirely bought into it. It's been only partially successful in some cases. But they've managed to hide their operation really well. They've integrated cybernetic attacks and less than kinetic attacks into their operations really well. And and the result has been that the United States has knocked over Venezuela and is in the process of knocking over Iran. I know the Iran situation is still up in the air. I don't want to call it too early here. It's a very bad situation. It's a situation that's not worth getting into, but I think it's just unlikely that this is a situation that Iran walks away from very happy. Uh, that's my thought for the day. Be wary of doctrinal advantages. Be wary of thinking that just because you know something today, it's going to continue to be useful forever. And don't go looking for wars or confrontations that don't really benefit you. Don't go looking for confrontations that don't benefit you. That's a lesson that Putin is hopefully, well, Putin's not really learning it, but Russia's going to have to deal with it in Ukraine. And that's a lesson that the Americans, who have started to use this system very effectively, are learning in Iran. All right. Have a good one. That was your geopolitics thought for the day for March 30th, 2026.